I'm Diego Cordovez.
Adam Schoenfeld.
Welcome to The Scoop, brought to you by Full Tilt Poker. Last week we had Chris Ferguson, and he was very interesting.
We've asked him to come back.
He earned a second episode, much to his relief. He gets double pay because, he earns double scale. And if you missed part one, it's on Card Player TV. And it's imperative to watch part one before part two, otherwise it'll be impossible to joining, something in the middle. But we've got Chris Ferguson back for part two today. I've always seen in interviews with you, especially kind of the mainstream, kind of not hardcore poker media, they play you up as you've got a PhD in computer science, you focused on artificial intelligence, so they always say you've built all these models to study poker and use computers to really analyze the game. Now, no doubt you've taken an analytical approach, but do you still do that? Is that still a big part of the game where you have some advanced models and artificial intelligence that you've used?
I've done a lot of that in the past, and I don't. Artificial intelligence, not so much. Really, it's much more. Most of my research has all been game theoretic, so my research is actually a lot more mathematical than computer based. But I have done a lot of work with the computer. So, but most of my research has been mathematical, using game theory to determine the correct strategies and stuff like that.
What would be? I mean, just for simpletons like ourselves, what would be? What would be one problem that you'd tackle, and how would you approach it from when you say, we understand game theory and like a prisoner's dilemma, but what would be a way to model a poker problem?
Yeah, I'll kind of generally the way poker situations are modeled, instead of giving one player a hand and another player a 5-card hand or whatever, you actually would give one player a randomly chosen number between 0 and 1. It could be 0.70965 or whatever it is, and the other player gets a similar random number, and this number represents the strength of the hand. And then we will set the parameters on how you can play this game, right? Okay, how many raises are allowed? Is it limit? Is it no limit? And depending on the rules, we can solve some more complicated games under some restrictions. We can't solve poker yet, right? So we have to find a game that is similar to poker, similar enough to poker that solving it is meaningful, but simple enough that you actually can solve it. And so most of the problem of doing this research isn't actually solving it. Any old PhD in mathematics can solve it. The
You're run-of-the-mill Joe PhD, we call him.
That's about half the field in your typical $300 tournament, for example.
Joe PhD, Susie, Nobel laureate.
But the true art of it, to me, the art of it is actually finding the question to ask. What problem are we going to solve? What problem can we find that is close enough to poker that the answer is meaningful, yet is simple enough that someone can solve it?
When I remember Mike Sexton talking about when you first started coming around, you had a notebook with numbers written down.
Oh yeah.
I love this. And Mike said something to the effect of, "This guy will never make it."
Sure, all the old timers, right? This long head with a notebook.
So that was.
I'll tell you, I was friends with Mike. We're still friends. We actually knew Mike from the dance world. We're both swing dancers,
both ballroom.
But here's kind of when I knew I could. It's actually that kind of experience actually made me realize that I could make it as a poker player, because I'd done a lot of analysis, and I'd solved some interesting problems, and I'd solved some very specific problems, and I could see players making really horrible mistakes in these situations where I knew how to play, and I knew how to play. I could prove it.
Right.
I could prove that this was the right strategy, and I could see people, even great players, making horrible mistakes in these situations, right? And that's when I knew I was onto something, where I really had something that was very meaningful to poker, and that I could actually one day beat these guys.
Right. I remember sweating final tables with you, and this might have been the same notebook or a different notebook, and you were writing down every single hand that was played. And you were writing down, what cards people. Of course, this is before there were whole card cameras or whatever, so we were somewhat limited. But every turn card, how it played out or whatever. So did you go home and then analyze hand by hand?
I don't remember. I don't really remember that too well. I probably did it, but I don't think I went and ever.
went
analyzed
crazy.
Oh, I
it.
remember you doing that also because this was it might have been the final at a World Series of Poker event. It might have been the main event. I can't remember, but Chris had his hand.
I would do that. That's right. Yeah, I did that a number of times. Mainly the main event of the World Series.
And either you had to go to the restroom or
then
you
you
had
won
to go
it.
talk
It
to
worked.
someone, and you had me do it for you, but I had to resort to the Phil Rizzuto. You remember
That's a
when
mistake.
Phil Rizzuto would keep score at the baseball game, a lot of it he'd write down DNS, not C,
Yeah.
because I couldn't pay attention, or I'd lose a street, and so I ruined your record keeping.
I actually kept records for the World Poker Tour for many years.
Right.
I did that once also, and I took it very seriously, and then my head was going to explode. Just tracking it is difficult.
No, I took it seriously. I created a spreadsheet program that would, as I tracked the hands, would actually keep track of all the chip counts of all the players. So I'd know exactly how many chips people played. It was actually I was doing it for the World Poker Tour to help them with their broadcast, so they could. So when you see those chip numbers at the bottom of the screen, the first couple of seasons, that was me doing that stuff.
Yeah, no, I remember because you'd be in the credits. Additional assistance, Chris Ferguson. Unclear exactly what it was, but
That's what it was.
One of the things right now that makes a big distinction between, very well done poker TV and maybe not as well is if they have the chip counts and they keep updating them and they're correct, because of course stack size is so important, especially in a
Yeah. There's no context when they don't have the stack sizes, and then these plays make no sense whatsoever. And the other thing is the way that they cut the shows is, they skip a lot of hands, so all of a sudden you see a guy play another guy, they both have about the similar stacks, and then suddenly one guy's got a huge stack, and another guy's got a little nub, and he's forced to go all in, and the first guy's called him with 10-3, and it doesn't add up. They just showed the main event of the this year's World Series with Peter Escape won. And even though in real life they played for something like 3 hours or 3.5 hours, and it was really closely contested till the end, they just devoted like the last 5 minutes of the show
to the heads up.
And suddenly they're even in chips, and then also they cut, and Peter Escape's got like a 6-1.
He had 120 million, right?
120 million to 16
it was more like
million.
12 to
and they get it all in, and it's all over, and people are watching, saying, "I guess that's how heads up works when 9 million's."
They played for probably 4 hours or something.
They had to,
like that.
yeah.
And they only showed 2 of the hands.
2 hands.
Right.
We can understand why they were forced to do that, because if the heads up had gone one hand, they're editing this on the fly.
Yeah.
I don't want to totally, rip them apart, because they were in a tough spot having only, 36 hours to put this together.
And the last, one thing we were talking about, the last, 5 years, dating back to 2004 when, I guess it's 4 years, 2004, 5, 6, 7, when Greg Raymer won, Joe Hashem, Jamie Gold, and then Jerry Yang. All 4 of those heads-up battles lasted like 10 hands or less. They were over almost instantly. Now, in this case, I think people knew that with 2 pretty sharp guys who are real pros and pretty even in chips, it was probably going to last longer. But those 4 in a row were just very anticlimactic. Yeah. Unlike when you won.
When you played TJ, that was a marathon.
That was real drama.
Right.
But it took like 18 hands to get to that stuff.
Right.
Yes, TJ.
But that was real drama people saw it because it was on Discovery Channel and they did a documentary. But now if it was on ESPN with TJ making a big comeback and all the split pots between you, and again, I remember the scene, the only time I've ever seen you in all these years with your hat off, because there was so much pressure and so much going on. You took your hat off
during play. Yeah,
it was very. The main reason it was extremely hot in that.
Only your girlfriend's ever seen you with your hat off, other than that instance.